Welcome to Planet of the Associations. I'm Seth Kahan.
And I'm Mark Levy.
And, I've been trying to figure out, what am I doing in this episode? What's really going on here? What is Planet of the Associations? Mark, tell me.
Yes. So Planet of the Associations, right? This is about the association of the near future, 3 years from now, whenever you're listening to this, X+3. And in the last episode, we were talking about innovation and creativity and the need to look at what you're doing from angles that kind of get you intentionally lost. I called it in Accidental Genius, one of my books, I call it forced creativity, that people don't like to think up new ideas. They say they do, but they don't, and they don't go far enough in thinking up new ideas, right? It's just unnerving to be in places where we don't know everything that's happening. So I've worked with lots of people. And the only way you can get people to think up genuinely new ideas is to get them temporarily lost. That means lost from their egos, lost from their normal ideas, lost from their normal stories. And the way to do that is to make things very, very simple on them. So it would be, let's not brainstorm answers, let's brainstorm questions. It would be, let's not come up with new ideas, let's not come up with great ideas, let's come up with bad ideas. It would be, let's take the problem and divide it into 4, even though it doesn't really have 4 pieces. Things like that. All those things would be ways of getting people disoriented in what's happening. And then you have them think about the situation from that place where they're lost. But I know, Seth, that you know a lot about being lost and not being lost, and in particular, not being lost. And it's all from your background. Tell us.
Well, I love to go camping. I love to go camping in the wilderness. I like to go off the grid. I like to go by myself. And as a result of that, I have been lost before. And I mean lost. And let me tell you, being lost is not fun. It's very scary. In fact, the number one thing you have to be careful of when you get lost, and just imagine, you're in the woods. We've all gone for walks on a hiking trail. Imagine you're in the woods and there's no trail, that you're looking down at the ground and there's no clear path forward, behind you, sideways. It's getting darker as I'm talking about this.
Right.
Sun, by the way. So you get to the place where you spin around and all you see are trees and bushes and, nothing familiar. Boy, your cortisol can start flowing through your system. It shorts out your ability to think straight. And that is the number one thing that you have to be on guard for, because there have been lots of studies done. And I know because I've read these studies in my attempt to stay found. And what the number one thing is that people run into is shock. And they create that shock themselves by traumatizing themselves, by fantasizing what could go wrong and really getting scared. In fact, if you look at the literature and you say, who does the best job of staying found after they've been lost, it's not ex-military. It's not outdoorsmen. It's not people who are trained in map and compass or Boy Scouts. It's none of those people. It's not even adults. It's young people, especially around the ages of 10 to 12. And the reason is because once you're 10, you've got enough internal integrity to know that you should be found, to be able to think yourself out of where you are, to be able to operate intellectually and say, I've got to do something about this situation and I'm capable of, devising a plan and carrying it out. But you also take care of yourself in a way that adults don't, which means that you lie down and take a nap when you're tired. You eat when you're hungry, you drink when you're thirsty. And adults tend to push. And just think about all of these people out in the world, going through their 9-to-5 jobs. Maybe they're working 50, 60 hours a week, and how we train ourselves to push. Well, when you're lost, that can result in serious bad decisions. Like, if I can just get to the top of this hill, then I can see where I am. And then you're not looking at where you're going and you break your leg. Or if you're in shock, you put down your pack and you walk away from it. There are so many documentations of people doing things like that, silly things. So one of the main things you got to learn when you are lost is how to keep your marbles. And I spent some time with Tom Brown, the tracker.
The most famous of all trackers, right?
Yes, he is. He's an incredible guy. I spent a week with him in a class and I learned all kinds of stuff. And one of the things he teaches you are simple techniques for keeping your cool, including things like if you smoke, have a cigarette. Like whatever it takes to calm you down, that's what you need to do. This is not the time to worry about smoking too many cigarettes because you want to be around to smoke at least another pack or two, right?
Right.
So if it chills you out, go for it. So that maintaining center is key when you're lost.
Yeah, well, right. Maintaining center, we'll get back to that in a second. But it's interesting. You were telling me a bit because I was very impressed. It's like, what? Tom Brown? You were with him for a week? That's amazing.
Not too far from you, right?
Right. In the Pine Barrens, right? Very close to me. So it's interesting that it seemed like even when you're lost, there are so many things that are still predictable.
Yes.
That we think of being lost as being totally ripped from the moorings.
Right.
And that we're totally just swirling around in some maelstrom. But there's an endless number of things that you can count on or that are predictable. So tell us about some of these things in detail or so,
Yeah, well, for one of the simplest things is when you get lost is if you're going into the woods, one way to not get lost is just turn around every once in a while and look at what the trail looks like going back, because that's what you're going to be following when you're trying to get out of the woods. And it looks completely different. So the simple idea of being aware of where you are and turning around and looking at the path back to safety can save your life, literally. Another thing is that if you're out in the woods, let's say you're really lost and you know that people are going to be looking for you, right? Like you told your girlfriend before you went into the woods, I'll be back for dinner tonight. It's 8:00 at night. The sun's going down. You have no freaking idea where you are, except you probably know you're in North America if that's where you started out, right? And it's like, what do you do? Well, if people are going to come looking for you, one of the best things you can do is stay still. It's really hard to find someone who's on the move. It's much easier to find someone because you can fan out and you can cover territory easily. In fact, I'll say I was involved in search and rescue for a little while. I got trained in search and rescue. The reason I was taking the Tom Brown class is because I wanted to learn these techniques. And so I also got trained in wilderness survival skills, search and rescue. And fanning out and covering ground is a very easy thing to do, right? So unless you're like hiding under a log or something, people are going to find you when they do that, but you got to stay still. Otherwise, as you can imagine, you could be in a place that they've already scanned and then you move, or not be in a place that they haven't scanned and then move to a place they already have and then they won't find you, so on and so forth.
I remember you telling me that Tom Brown said, people don't move in a straight line.
That's right. That's right. So everybody walks with an angle. And when he starts to find someone, like let's say there's a small child that's wandered into the woods, they might be walking at a very slight angle to the left. He'll track them for half a mile, a very short distance, and he'll be able to tell what that angle is. And then he can literally go predict where that person is going to be, even to the point with some of his people that he's found, he would just go to the edge of the woods where he could see that they were going to walk out and wait for them. And they would just emerge from the woods on their own. Right. So once you know the angle at which someone tends to walk, you can see where their path is going to be.
Right. So you had talked about this idea, you had talked about centering.
Yes.
Right. And it seemed to me that even in situations that seem dire or seem very unusual, right? We're in a COVID or post-COVID kind of situation. Hopefully we're coming out of this situation and it seems kind of lawless. And it seems, like how do you get your association or how do you get your organization or so back on its feet? But there's still, even if you don't have all the tactics spelled out, there are still predictable things that you can go to help you navigate in a situation where you're kind of lost, right? So I think perhaps one of those things, and it's very convenient for me to say this because I do this for a living, but I believe it. I believe my stuff.
You're aligned with your work.
I'm aligned with what I sell. So like this idea of your big sexy idea, or what your organization is about, like what its true mission is, what its true point of differentiation is, what its true position. So that to me acts as something that keeps your head up and looking up towards something glorious, even if you don't know exactly what route to take to it. And another way to get to it is the idea of your organizational values. And as you know, I like to tell the story. A wonderful client of mine, Dina, she was the CEO. She was the chairman of the board of a multi-billion-dollar organization. And so I once asked her, I said, suppose you had a really difficult personnel problem that you had to deal with, like, a major problem. And I said, because the complexity of her world was shocking to me. I try to make things very simple, and she had to deal with all kinds of different franchises and like thousands of people or whatnot. And I said, so if someone came to you with a major problem, what would you do? And she, without hesitation, said, well, the first thing I do is I look to our values, and I'd see what our values said. And I remember when she told me that stunned me. Because I had always, when people talked about their values organizationally, I never thought of them I always thought of them as window dressing. I thought of them as like drapes, like, well, let's change the drapes. We'll change our values. They were some sales gimmick. It was like nothing that was real. I had never seen someone. It's like, and if you know Dina, it's very real when she says stuff like that. It's like, oh yeah, we'd look to our values. We'd first look to how we decided we need to be in the world. And then once we thought of that, then we would approach the situation. How is the situation work with or go against our values? So to me, those kinds of things, the idea of your differentiation or your mission and also your values help to keep you centered, and they help keep you found in difficult situations. What's your...
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think about when the pandemic hit for me personally, right? So I'm a consultant. So basically all of my business just stopped in the middle of March of 2020. There was nothing there, which is very unusual for me. In fact, it's never happened before. So it was like, it should have said, oh my God, this is a red alarm alert, you're in trouble. But that's not what happened. What happened was I realized we were in an emergency. I imagined that the emergency would be short-lived. It might be 6 months, it might be a year, it might be a year and a half, but it was going to be finite. And I knew that I had to take care of my clients because I truly believe in associations, and I have real relationships with about 80 CEOs of associations, and I wanted to provide them with whatever they needed. And so the first thing I did was convene them and ask them what they needed. And then I set about starting to create that stuff. And so that's where my values guided me. And in an emergency, those values are something to hold on to. They're solid ground. So while the ground is, everything else is shifting around you, you go, yeah, I'm here to serve these people. In my model, leadership is personal. So when I serve an organization, I'm serving an individual human being. It could be a director on the board. It could be the CEO, a member of the C team. But I am asking myself, how do I help this person? And fortunately, I know these people. They're not strangers to me. So it would be like if you needed help. It's like, if Mark needs help, am I going to go, start creating PDFs that I think Mark needs? No, I'm going to call Mark up. Mark, what do you need? What's going on? Right. And I called a number of my friends and they said, we're in an existential crisis. Our trade show has been stopped within weeks of when it was going to be held. And we get over 60% of our revenue. One person, even over 90% of her revenue comes from the trade show. So that's I pulled all of those people together and I started a community around how do you handle the financial existential crisis that you're in? And they started sharing stuff back and forth. We're doing this, we're doing that. This is what you need to check in with your insurance, do this, blah, 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 and off to the races they were going and sharing their stuff. So that was driven by my value of that personal relationship with that leader and my desire to help them. So that makes total sense to me.
what does the idea of being in service to people or to a cause, what does that mean to you? Like, what's the definition of being in service?
It means that I'm going to do what I can to support your success. That's what being in service means. So obviously I have to be aligned with your success. I have to believe in your success. And if you're the CEO of an association, to me, there's two levels there. The first and most important is you as a human being, because if your integrity is threatened, you can't serve the organization. So I want to make sure you're okay. And that could be a check-in, a mental health check-in. That could be an opportunity to bounce things off me. Like I could just say, I'll just call and just talk for half an hour and you can just let it all out. I'll track what you're saying. Then I'll help you kind of pull it back together and we'll think about where to go from here. Or it could be someone could say I've got a child who's needs care and they're in another state and suddenly I can't travel and I'm really scared about that. So then it's brainstorming. How are you going to take care of this so that you are a functioning leader? Because I know that if you can't take care of this, you won't be. And so I just help on that level. And that's like something I would never imagine I'd be involved in. But if it's what it takes, then we do it. Then the second level is the organization. So what does the organization need? Like, for example, if you just had all your revenues cut, what is the implications for your staff, for your resources, for your, what's in the bank? What kind of a line of credit do you have? What are your products and services likely to bring in? There's all these other variables that start coming into play because of the financial existential threat. But for many, it was not financial. That was only a small segment of my clients. So I'd say out of 80 people who I knew really well, probably 15 of them were facing a financial existential threat. The others were facing other concerns. How do we virtualize quickly? Now all of a sudden we need to all be working from home. How are we going to be able to make that work? And I had a small group of people that were challenged with that. And I had another group of people that were excelling at that. So it was kind of like get them to cross-pollinate, pull the lessons from one and give them to the other. And so on and so forth. So first level was the individual human being. Second level was the leader in the organization.
How does, for leaders in associations, and I'm sure many people listening, they live their lives in service to but let's pretend that there's someone who doesn't really know how to go about doing that. How would a leader of an association what's the thinking involved and what would that look like behaviorally, like out in the world? What would the movie be of someone like totally congruent in service for their members in an association?
So they need to establish communications with the members who can give them the most information. So obviously there's the board of directors and the executive committee. So there should be phone calls with them as a group and phone calls with them individually just to poll them and find out what's going on in the sector. Where are the challenges? What do we need to be thinking about systemically? Then I always like to move outside of the formal leadership because there are blind spots that formal leaders have. So then I would be tapping staff and thought leaders inside the membership who are not holding leadership positions, especially if you have a contrarian, then they become extremely valuable. I want to know what your perspective is on what's going on and what we should be doing. So it's like accelerated information gathering from your most reliable sources.
Interesting. And what would you do? So that's the information gathering, but then how, like, what's the product that's produced from that? Like, what's the service? What's the product? I'm being a little too distant sounding, but like, how would I don't think well in abstract, like it's got to be super, super concrete. So what would I see happening in the world where I'd say, oh, that person's living in service to these people?
Right. So there's kind of three different levels that I imagine in my mind, my framework. One is non-essential. My members are non-essential workers. In other words, they're not covered by the emergency relief that's taking place, and they are still going to be very concerned about their livelihood and their ability to get through this. So how do I take care of them? Then I have essential workers, but not frontline workers. So this could be like restaurant employees or people who are working in the back room to keep something open or what, I don't know what, but people who have been deemed essential. So it could be manufacturers, whatever. Then there are true frontline people. These are like the people who are manning the ICU, right? The nurses and the doctors who are going in and facing the frontier where the danger's happening every day. Each one of those three groups requires different kinds of products and services. So the first group How are you going to stay alive? How are you going to make it through the span? How are you going to get from where you are now to where you're starting to feel comfortable again? The second group, which means essential workers, but not frontline, what do you need to know in order to take care of yourself in these times? Because you're going to be called in a different way. And the frontline workers may require, immediate, urgent care in order to sustain themselves. So, for example, we may have doctors and nurses who are working around the clock. What kind of support do they need? How do we make sure that they get what they're needing, that we're providing anything that will help them get through this emergency time?
What's an example of an organization or someone who did something for you that you would consider being in service to you, like with a company that dealt with you?
So one of the people who comes to my mind is Alan Weiss. The first time that I was involved in a major emergency at a national scale was with the mortgage crisis as a consultant, right? So I've got clients. This was 2008, 2009, and the economy was tanking. And Alan, who runs a community of consultants like us, right, basically said, "This is your moment to shine. Step into it. This is not something to be scared of. There will be stress, but this is the time to extend yourself." And he started giving me things that I could do. For example, he said, reach out to your clients who are suffering at this time and give them some consulting advice for free. I never would have come up with that on my own. And I got called into one of my favorite clients, which was the American Public Transportation Association. They were having a strategy meeting. They needed help from someone like me, and they had $0 because their portfolios were shrinking as we were talking. And I came in, I spent half a day with them. That half a day meant so much to them that I got immediate engagements as soon as the economy started coming back, and we built a long-term relationship just because I gave them a half a day of my time. Alan provided me with the algorithm. Your clients are in an emergency. Offer to help. Here's how you do that. So that's an example of someone being in service to me. And of course, I pay Alan to take his workshops, to get his advice on so many things that have to do with my consulting. That cemented our relationship. He was there for me when I needed him.
So what for associations, what would the algorithm be for them, for people listening on being in service?
So it's understanding the most imperative needs of your members and making sure that you have the ability to provide that or finding it for them. A great example of someone finding it for them, I worked with the CEO of the Pinellas Realtor Association during that time when the economy was collapsing. And in Florida, where that real estate association existed, all of the members essentially lost their jobs overnight because the real estate market tanked and people were selling short, and it wasn't coming back fast. And what that woman did, first off, was she figured out how to put food on their table. And she did it by identifying an activity that real estate agents would be good at that would make money for them. And I forget what it was. It was some direct marketing thing, right? Like selling Tupperware or Herbalife, or I don't know what it was, but it was something like that. And she got them all up and running so that they were able to take care of their families. And that built the bond. Second thing she did, she offered the first national seminar on selling short. Nobody was doing it in the early days because it was so distasteful, but she knew that there were thousands, if not millions of people in the United States who had to sell short because the circumstances were unforgiving. And so nobody knew how to do it. So she created a seminar in it, how to do it right. And then she had people from all over the country coming to her to take that seminar. And of course, that was a revenue stream for her. And she slowly started to pull herself out of the hole with that process. That's an example of being in service.
It sounds like some of these ways of being in service have to do, like it's in response to what you see happening. It's almost like answering questions that are being overtly asked, and perhaps others are creating something that you're not being asked about or that doesn't exist. So it's interesting to say, what do people overtly need help with? What are they asking for help with? They may not be asking me, but what do they need help with? And they know they need help with it. And what do they need help with? Only they don't know.
Yes.
That they need help with it. And how to go about it. What's something that associations might need help with, but they don't know that they need help with? Or some people would. I mean, of course, there's people who know.
Right now, associations need help with understanding how to be relevant to the future of this country. If they go back to the model that they were in 2 years ago, they're going to slide further into the past in terms of relevance. This country has gone through a significant inflection point in terms of the pandemic, in terms of the economy, and it's not the same world it was a year and a half ago. They have to demonstrate that they can provide enormous and uncopyable value right now. And they can. The exciting thing is that they can. Associations can do things that no other organization can, but they got to step into it. And by the way, this is an important point because you said it's about being responsive, but you can't win a game by playing defense, right? It only take you so far. So when there's an incursion, you want to play defense really well. And the pandemic was an incursion, but we're now shifting out of it. Right. And things could change. We could fall back in. We don't know. But right now, the trend is we're shifting out of it. And so it's time to go on the offense. And that means that associations have to step into the front with their value. They can't just serve their members right now. They have to start providing leadership for their members now. And that's a very different act. That's something that many of them don't realize.
Yeah. And it seems to me we had last episode, in the beginning of this episode, we were talking about creativity and innovation. And it seems like, to bring that back up again here, this idea of you sometimes, to be a proper leader and to remain relevant, that's the word that you use, the idea of being relevant. You need to be creative or innovative. Like the means of relevance won't just be sitting there for you.
That's right. Absolutely. Yeah.
you kind of have to create your way into relevance.
Yeah.
Right. So for what is relevance?
Hold on just a second. So you said the means for relevance won't just be sitting there in front of you. And then you said, and I like that. That's something, I mean, it's like there's a hook there. It's
like a Rocky and Bullwinkle laugh. All right.
Moose and squirrel.
Right.
Yeah, that's it. It's a tell, and the tell is that's really an important insight, right? Because you're going from being responsive. What do they need? Let me help you. And there's a certain point where now suddenly you have to shift gears, and you have to start saying, let me take you out of here. Not just let me serve you and make sure you survive, but now I'm going to tell you what to do so that you can go to the next level, right?
Like Gene Hackman in the Poseidon Adventure. You've got to be like Gene Hackman in the Poseidon Adventure. That's the whole key to everything. Everyone watch the Poseidon Adventure again and watch Gene Hackman. But it's this idea. It's funny because you would think people would tell you everything they need, but they don't know.
That's right.
They don't know what they need, and they certainly don't understand the means of how to get what it is they need. So that's where so again, to go back to the idea, what's the definition of relevance?
Okay. What's the definition of relevance? Relevance is being of extreme importance and coupled with a sense of the ability to perform, the ability to deliver. So it's like this is something that I'm very interested in, if you're relevant to me, and it's something where you have something really valuable to offer me in this space, and I know that.
Yeah, well, and so I love that, but to me, I mean, and I guess you were saying this, but to put it in different language, it's making sure that what you're doing is so ripped from the lives of the people that you're trying to help that they see it immediately. It's like, oh my God, this is exactly, whether I knew to articulate it this way or not, this is exactly something that's happening to me right now. Like I don't have to make any side steps in order to,
Right.
it's important to me and it's instantly important to me.
Yes, yes. And one of the great things about associations, and this is something I'm particularly fond of in terms of their qualities, because they have so many members, they're able to see the circumstances from multiple points of view simultaneously. And that has meta information in it. So you can see, if you talk to 15 people who are all in trouble in the same sector, you can see what it is they all need, because their needs start to converge in the future outside of their space. You start to say, okay, I can play all those, and they all need to go over here. So I'm going to teach them how to get here, right? When I was doing knowledge management at the World Bank, I worked with communities of practice, people who were involved in carrying out activities in the same space. And we used that principle over and over and over again to continue to evolve the frontier of the field.
Beautiful. Evolving the frontier of the field, our next talk is going to start there. Evolving the frontier of the field. I'm going to remember that. Evolving the frontier of the field. I'm going to say it like 12 times to myself so that we know where to begin. So anyway, this is Plan the Associations. I'm Mark Levy.
And I'm Seth Kahan.
And see you next time.